Good morning, my friends. I'm back here today. It is a beautiful morning in California, and I am happy to engage with you again. Um, we are in the midst, as you know, of a global pandemic with COVID 19. There's a lot of anxiety and fear, and there is also a lot of panic right now. People are going through different stages of grief, including feeling victimized, feeling angry, feeling frustrated, feeling helpless, some resigning to the situation, others accepting it, and some finding deeper meaning in this global crisis. In my previous communications with you, we've talked about physical health and how to optimize our physical well-being. In other words, how to create a joyful experience of our body, a joyful, energetic body, as I've said before. We've also talked about the mental anguish that is happening and people not being able to find peace of mind in the midst of all this turbulence. And we are also seeing a lot of stress, which, as I've mentioned before, compromises the immune system and leads to panic, which can lead to irrational behavior, but also recycles as stress compromising the immune system and causing inflammation in the body. In my previous posts, I've also mentioned what we call the cytokine storm, which is basically an inflammatory storm that occurs in many people as they go into acute phase of corona infection, when they start getting respiratory distress, acute respiratory discomfort, and ultimately need a ventilator and sometimes succumb to death. All this is accompanied, it's becoming very clear, by something called a cytokine storm. And the evidence is showing that if you stay centered, if you stay calm, if you quieten the mind, or you do deep breathing and certain yoga asanas, even a simple asana like sun salutation, a few times a day. You take a break and do that a few times a day. Then these practices, meditation, asanas, pranayam, can help mitigate the likelihood of the cytokine storm, and that would obviously influence the morbidity and mortality of COVID-19. I have written about this, and there are all the scientific citations are available on the Chopra Foundation website. They're also available at the Chopra Library. But today I want to talk about the spiritual aspect of this crisis. And I think what is becoming obvious is that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, is inducing a lot of existential anxiety, existential distress, existential suffering. And in the background of all this is the fear of suffering from the physical illness and also the fear of death. I think we cannot deny that this is, at the moment, a pandemic in the ecosystem of human existence. Once again, what is coming out very clearly is existential anxiety, existential suffering, and the fear of death. And for this reason, I think we need to have the only solution that can take us beyond this existential suffering and the fear of death. And the only way, I reassure you, the only way is the spiritual way, understanding both intellectually and experientially what it means to be a spiritual being. What really does it mean to be a spiritual being? So I've written about this, and most recently I wrote about this for NBC, the news network. And you can go on their website and read my post on the CNBC website. But I'll read a little bit from my notes, and then I'll go beyond that to share with you how we can actually find a solution to existential suffering and even the fear of death. We can go beyond that, both experientially and intellectually. So let me read a little bit from my notes. There are 3 levels of response to the Corona-19 or COVID-19 outbreak. How it affects us physically, mentally, and spiritually. The physical response came first, and by now everyone knows about self-isolation, social distancing, and testing. The second effect on our psyches is being experienced personally, but with only fitful answers and advice. And the best advice in the mental area is meditation and yoga and relaxation techniques, and paying attention every day to finding not just relaxation but joy and comfort in your life. So that's very obvious. The virus makes the need for interventions, both mental, physical, and psychological and emotional, very important and urgent in this moment. And the good news is that meditation and yoga are good for anti-stress, which is connected to a strong immune response. And again, I've spoken at length about this. But it is the third area, the spiritual effect of the outbreak, that is being neglected, even though the presence of death, whether we want it or not, evokes concern about the state of our souls. Spiritual well-being is alien to many people's daily lives. And with the decline of organized religion, millions of people experience a sick soul, or what we might say the dark night of the soul, however you want to define it. There's a weariness of heart. There's existential dread. There's a sinking feeling that nothing really matters. And frequently, there's a sense of resignation and helplessness. So I would suggest that don't spend more than a few minutes diagnosing these feelings, because everyone is experiencing them. Almost everyone. Nor is it necessary to enter into metaphysical speculation, although I'm going to do that today with your indulgence. Many people are advising me, stay away from philosophy, stay away from metaphysical speculation. First of all, I can't do that because it's my lifelong obsession. But also I think right now, the deeper understanding, metaphysical understanding and philosophical understanding and intellectual understanding and experiential understanding is very important for your overall well-being. Very important for your overall well-being. For your physical well-being, for your emotional well-being, for your social well-being, ultimately even for things like community well-being and financial well-being and so on. So with your indulgence, I'm going to speculate a little bit on the philosophy of how we can actually understand metaphysics and philosophy and Eastern wisdom traditions and Western wisdom traditions to get a deeper understanding of fundamental reality which can take us beyond existential suffering, the fear of death, and the fear of the unknown. But we can always start our spiritual journey in the following ways: having a sense of meaning and purpose in our existence, loving and being loved, finding true self-esteem and a sense of our own worth, tapping into inner peace and joy. And at this moment I should say something. Peace of mind is an oxymoron. There's no such thing. Okay, because the mind can never be peaceful. The mind is always evaluating, defining, describing, judging, and so the mind is constantly like a seesaw. At one moment happy, another moment sad, one moment enthusiastic, another moment in despair, one moment exhilarated, another moment frustrated, etc. So the mind can never give you peace. It is what is in the background of the mind that can give you peace. And what is in the background of your mind is your soul, is your spirit, is your being. That can give you peace. And it's already there. It's the peace that passes understanding. So tapping into inner peace and joy by going beyond the mind. That's the value of meditation. By being of service to others, what we call karma yoga. Do what needs to be done, leave the results to the divine. And by being generous of spirit. These are all spiritual technologies or strategies that bring healing not only to ourselves but to others as well. So we don't need to apply words like religious experience or religious ideology or dogma. Even the word spiritual for some people can be misleading because they confuse it with organized religion. But spirituality means ultimate self-awareness. So, and these ideas are not original. They have long traditions in both East and West, and they have been examined and understood by humans throughout history. And more to the point, they are practical. They give you a sense of control over your life, and by bringing you closer to your soul, spirit, or higher awareness, or your deeper self, whatever term you like, these things reverse the most damaging spiritual trend in modern society, the desperate need or urge to flee from ourselves. They basically allow us to get intimacy with our own self. So your soul is the most important part of you, and it isn't found by running away. Write down how you can perform an act of kindness today. Show appreciation to someone. Offer help to those in need. Or bring comfort to someone feeling lonely and anxious. The simple human gestures we tend to overlook, and see how good you'll feel, how safe you'll feel. And you'll find meaning and purpose at the same time in your life. So in a time of crisis, the impulse is to go into emergency mode, fear, concern, and panic. But giving in to these impulses only engenders an epidemic of panic and ultimately leads to biological chaos. I want to particularly underscore the issue of finding inner peace and joy, which can seem like a remote possibility just now and in the coming months, but it's not. In the world's wisdom traditions, it has been taught in every culture that inner peace and joy are available only by looking inward. The Old Testament says, "Be still and know that I am God." The New Testament says that the kingdom of heaven is within. The Indian Vedic tradition says Ananda or bliss lies at the heart of creation. So these are universal truths, but they don't matter until they're true for you personally. So now is the time to make these universal truths true for you personally. The secret imparted by the world's wisdom traditions is that your sense of self, the simple experience of I am, I exist, is the gateway to inner peace and to joy. Meditation is nothing more than being alone in silence with yourself and letting your awareness go to the place where peace and joy are eternal and timeless. That's how you must be now. That's how you test an eternal truth and make it true for you. It actually even doesn't matter what kind of meditation you do. So observing the breath, mantra meditation, self-inquiry, self-reflection, mindful awareness of experience. I've talked about these in the past, but I want to go a little deeper right now, having shared with you what I've shared publicly elsewhere as well. But now let's go a little deeper. So, I, for the last 40 years, have not only practiced meditation for the last 40 years, but I've also done something called yoga nidra at night. I've also done inquiry at night and recapitulation of my life before I go to sleep. And about a week ago or 10 days ago, I also decided to take a week of silence and actually go deeper into my practice of inquiry and yoga nidra and mindfulness and even meditation on the phenomenon of death. So I want to share that a little bit with you and hope that you might get some benefit out of it. Okay, so before I sleep, and I do a lot of inquiry, but one of the questions that I've asked myself in stillness is, and we've pursued that here, is who am I? Who am I? And the practice can take many forms. Ramana Maharishi spoke about it and practiced it and taught it for decades. But here's the process that I've used. So after I asked myself, who am I asked myself, am I my physical body? And then the answer that came to me is the physical body is a changing process. I was once a fertilized egg. I was then an embryo. I was then an infant, a baby, a toddler, a teenager, a young adult, hopefully a mature adult, and now this guy with the beard and all of that. So my body has been a transforming, changing process ever since I was conceived. So if I identify with my body, then which one is it? Because I can't really call my body a noun. It's a verb, it's a process. And it's a process that's changing by the minute. So if my body is my identity, then that creates a lot of problems. Which body is my identity? I've had so many of them. There's a problem with identity. There's also a problem with the impermanence of the body, because the body in every moment that you experience is impermanent. The body you're experiencing right now is impermanent. You didn't have this body even a year ago. And this is your year 2020 model. And yet there's something about me that seems to have outlived the impermanence of the body. The impermanence of the body that was an embryo and an infant and a baby and a toddler and an adolescent. So I am convinced personally that I'm not the body. In fact, I'm also convinced that in the deeper reality, the body is a human construct for an intermittent stream of sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. Period. And they are coming and going in the twinkling of an eye. So I can't hang on to the idea that I am a body. It's a convenient experience that I'm having at the moment. Similarly, I can ask myself, am I the mind? And it's obvious that the mind is an intermittent stream of thoughts and feelings and emotions and memories and desires and aspirations. So, in fact, there's no such thing as a fixed mind either. It's an intermittent stream of ideas, sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, and so on. So obviously, I am not my body or even my personality, because my personality is evolving in every moment of experience and interpretation of that experience. So then that leads to a very deeper insight into the nature of our being, the awareness, the consciousness, the soul, the spirit, different aspects of it, the conscious agent in which all this experience is happening, the experience of the mind as a changing stream of thoughts, changing stream of emotions, aspirations, and the body a changing stream of sensations and perceptions, even the world a changing stream of perceptions. All this is happening on the screen of consciousness or witnessing awareness or the conscious agent that spiritual traditions call the soul. So as I practice this at night, and I practice this for decades, I personally do not identify with my mind or with my body or with the experiences of the world, because I recognize them as convenient human constructs for an intermittent stream of sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, perceptions, which are modified aspects of my own self, of my own soul, of my own spirit, of my own conscious being. And as modified aspects, they're constantly transforming and changing. But I, who is witnessing them, is a constant. I, as the seer, am constant in the midst of all changing scenery. I'm the background in which all this change occurs. Mind, body, universe. The background of experience. The background of emotions, by the way, turbulent or negative or positive, the background of all emotions is equanimity. The background of all sensations is bliss. The background of all perceptions is also bliss. The background of all sound is silence. The background of all color is light. So this is the background of experience which shapes our ideas of mind, body, and the world. At first, when you encounter this, when I am doing my recapitulation at night and remembering things from my childhood, that little argument with my mother, how we made up, her telling me beautiful stories and holding me in her arms, my father playing cricket with me, my friends in school reading poetry and Shakespeare and participating in plays and going to movies together Where is all that right now? When I look at that, first there's a little nostalgic sadness about it's all gone. It's all gone. My parents are gone. Much of my family, generation of my parents are gone. And I remember my father telling me about his tribulations and trials as a prisoner of war in the Second World War when he was in the British Army under siege in Imphal, Burma, and talking to me about food deprivation that he experienced. I remember my grandmother and grandfather on both sides telling me about the Indian partition when India broke up into Pakistan and India and the violence that occurred and so many people died. I remember my grandfather also talking about the First World War and his trials and tribulations. My father telling me about the Holocaust and about the story of Anne Frank and all those children who went to the gas chambers. What a violent history that humans have had throughout the ages and yet not learned from it. So much suffering that we have inflicted. But in any case, all that is over. There's the memory, there should be, so we can learn from it, but it's over. There is a certain nostalgia about the past, but also a certain celebration that it's over. But at the same time, there's existential anxiety. Then, if everything is over, who am I in the midst of all this that's happening? And if I identify with anything that I've had as an experience, which comes and goes, then there is jeopardy in the sense that there's a feeling of anxiety. And that feeling of anxiety, which we call existential anxiety, comes from provisional identities. The provisional identity. I'm a male. I'm human. I'm a body. I'm a mind. I'm a personality. I'm changing emotions. All this is just nothing other than sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, perceptions that come and go on the screen of consciousness. So there is anxiety. Oh, who am I in the midst of all this thought traffic, as Rumi says? In the midst of all this turbulence, who am I? And it's becoming very clear now with this pandemic as well, that this existential anxiety is there in every human being, and it will surface at some point, whether there's a pandemic or not. Okay, it will surface at some point when you're faced with old age, maybe infirmity, maybe impending death, maybe a cancer, maybe somebody else has a cancer, maybe somebody else in the family is having it. It will occur. Mark my words. If you don't have existential anxiety right now, you will have it at some point. Unless you go beyond appearance and understand reality. There is no solution other than a spiritual solution. And by spiritual, I mean self-awareness at the highest level. Self-awareness at the highest level. Because self-awareness is there at every level. Notwithstanding the accusations by some scientists that I'm a pseudoscientist and spout pseudo-scientific, profound bullshit. Never mind all that. But everyone, including the pseudoscientists, the real scientists, the atheists, the agnostics, and the religious people are going to have existential suffering and are having some of it right now. And so it doesn't matter whether you believe in God, you don't believe in God, you're indifferent, it doesn't matter. You have to find a solution for your existential suffering. And that can only happen if you first become comfortable with the more subtle aspects of existence, the more invisible aspects of existence. And then you go beyond that to the most invisible aspect of existence, which is your own true self. If you go beyond the visible aspects of existence, the visible aspects of existence are what we call objects, material entities, physical bodies, and physical universe, including that tree behind me. The visible aspects of existence. But these visible aspects of existence are actually perceptions. And perceptions as activities are invisible. A perception, seeing as an activity, hearing as an activity, sensing as an activity, tasting, smelling as an activity, thinking as an activity. These are all invisible. Okay. Imagination as an activity, invisible. So first you have to get comfortable with the invisible aspects of existence, the subtle aspects of existence are real. In fact, they're more real because when we get overwhelmed by our thoughts, our emotions, our anxieties, then that creates biological chaos. The visible gets affected when we get overwhelmed by the invisible. Every sensation is an invisible activity. Every perception, every thought, every feeling, every emotion, every image, every aspect of anxiety, invisible. But so is love, so is compassion, so is joy, so is equanimity, all invisible. So the invisible is what is causing the appearance of the visible. So first we have to get comfortable with that. Even on the physical level, atoms and particles and force fields and gravity are totally invisible, but they, from a materialistic ontological perspective, those invisible aspects of existence actually function as the visible universe. You've never actually seen a force field. You've never seen gravity. You've never seen atoms or particles or probability waves. And yet, that's the human construct that is supposed to express itself as the visible universe. So, the invisible realms of nature are much more powerful. Look at this coronavirus. It's invisible, right? What is it? It's a piece of genetic material, a piece of RNA that messes up with your genetic activity and causes inflammation and compromisation of the immune system and biological chaos and inflammatory storms and acute respiratory distress and even death. An invisible piece of genetic material that's right now inside us, outside us, and between us. It's creating a pandemic of illness in the world. An invisible piece of genetic information. But go beyond that. Go beyond that. Even the COVID virus is a word for an experience. And that experience is in awareness. And awareness is independent of all experience. How do I know that? Well, because I can shift my attention from one experience to another in the twinkling of an eye. I can think of my toes, I can think of the Empire State Building, I can think of my mother, I can think of Wall Street, I can think of the pandemic. In every second, I can shift my attention to anything. It's only that which I'm paying attention to that becomes stronger in my awareness. Okay, if I take my attention away from it, it weakens in my awareness. Of course, I need to be informed about everything, but I also need to be sober in that I don't get overwhelmed by the panic and fear that is around us. Okay? But it's clear that the invisible realms of existence are more powerful than any of the visible realms of existence. And what's the most invisible realm of existence? That you cannot see with a microscope or even see with the mind's eye. That which knows the mind, that which knows the body, that which knows all experience. What is that? When I recapitulate at night, what is it that is recapitulating? What is it that remembers the body of a teenager with this body and with this brain? What is it that thinks about the body and the brain of that teenager? What is that? We call it I am. I am. I am. I am. Aham. Shivoham. I am the witnessing awareness. And that, by the way, cannot be experienced through a system of thought. It cannot be experienced through a system of thought, through a religious thought, a philosophical thought, a metaphysical thought, or a scientific thought. The most invisible aspect of existence is existence itself, as pure awareness, pure consciousness. So it is with this understanding that the great wisdom traditions, Vedanta for example, speak about the causes of human suffering as the 5 kleshas, the 5 kleshas, Kleshas, the causes of human suffering. Cause number 1, not knowing our true self. The true self, the invisible, formless, infinite, timeless being in which all experience occurs, including the experience of the embodied self that we call a person. Klesha number 1. Klesha number 2 is grasping and clinging at experiences that are pleasant, but we know are evanescent, ephemeral, transient, a flash of lightning in the sky. Cause number 2 of suffering. Cause number 3 of suffering, fear, recoiling from that which is evanescent, transient, ephemeral, part of the changing scenery. Cause number 3. Cause number 4, identifying with the fragmented ego self, the socially induced hallucination of the fragmented mind. It doesn't even exist, but its experience is real, and therefore it creates anxiety. The ego is afraid of its death. 4th cause of suffering, And then the fifth cause of suffering is the fear of death. What is the fear of death? It's the fear of the unknown. But we forget, we live and breathe in the unknown all the time. Notwithstanding everybody's predictions about the COVID pandemic, somebody had asked you a year ago, what's the COVID pandemic? What's the risk of that? You wouldn't even know. Most of people, unless they're epidemiologists, wouldn't even know what somebody was speaking about if they were speaking about a possible COVID-19 pandemic a year or 2 years ago. Okay? But now it's causing the fear of death. But what is the fear of death? It's the fear of the unknown. The fact is, we live in the unknown in every moment of existence. Everything that is happening right now is what we call the present. And the present actually is not a moment in time. The present is the awareness in which time even is an experience. So, in that present, the presence of being, the presence of awareness, there is no suffering. There is no suffering. Because being is intrinsically not bound and is intrinsically free from all its experiences. Only when you become aware of experience. At some level, every cell in your body is having an experience. It doesn't even bother to tell you, your conscious mind, what the experience is, unless something goes wrong. My stomach starts feeling uncomfortable. Now that comes into my conscious awareness. Before that, the stomach was taking care of itself, self-regulating. And this self-regulation is universal at the cell level of cells, at the level of molecules, at the level of atoms, at the level of particles, at the level of the biology, at the level of the ecosystem, at the level of the cosmos. You know, these days people are familiar with the term cybernetics. Cybernetics means automatic self-regulation. It's being applied to machines now, artificial intelligence. But this automatic self-regulation is present in the whole cosmos. And when we actually interfere with it, then and then only do we experience what is being called human suffering. So my friends, I want to actually read to you something that I discovered yesterday, and I actually put it on my Twitter and on my Instagram, but I want to share it with you because it was a little poem that was published by a young Indian doctor. Actually, he's a medical student. His name is Dhruv Chauhan. Dhruv, I thank you for this beautiful poem that I'm now going to share with everyone in the world. And I'm just trying to find it, and I will read it to all of you so you can experience the joy that I experienced when I read the poem. I'm still trying to locate it, so bear with me, okay? The poem is about existence. And before I find the poem and start reading it to you, here's the basic message. And the basic message is, don't worry about existence. Existence will take care of itself. Existence will take care of itself. Just allow it to self-regulate itself. Okay, so here is the poem from Dhruv Chauhan, medical student in India. Thank you, Dhruv, for sharing this with the world, and I'm sharing it with the rest of the world, my world as well. So here's the poem, and Dhruv says, "We fell asleep in one world and woke up in another. Suddenly, Disney is out of magic. Paris is no longer romantic. New York doesn't stand up anymore. The Chinese wall is no longer a fortress, and Mecca is empty. Hugs and kisses suddenly become weapons, and not visiting parents and friends becomes an act of love. Suddenly you realize that power, beauty, and money are worthless and can't get you the oxygen you're fighting for. The world continues its life, and it is beautiful. It is beautiful. Just look at what's behind me. It's beautiful. Suddenly you realize that power, beauty, and money are worthless and can't get you the oxygen you're fighting for. The world continues its life, and it is beautiful. It only puts humans in cages." That's what is happening right now. Humans are in cages. I think it is sending us a message. And the message is, you are not necessary. The earth, the air, the water and sky are fine without you. When you come back, remember that you are my guests and not my masters. This is what nature is saying. We are going to make sure that existence survives. And if we are part of that existence and we don't interfere with it, then not only will existence survive, everybody will survive. Because life is sacred. And the sacred is what we have taken for granted. We have taken existence for granted. Once we go back to that place of gratitude for existence, and from there evoke divine emotions, empathy, compassion, loving kindness, joy, equanimity, grace, then and only then we will be holy, and then and only then will we be healed. The word holy, the word whole, the word health, the word healing are the same word. They are returned to the memory of wholeness, who we really are. Spiritual beings having a human experience. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes devastating, and sometimes exhilarating. But still part of the passing scenery. Only the seer is real. So take a stand today as witnessing awareness. Start your journey to spirit through self-reflection, through self-inquiry, through yoga nidra, through experiential knowledge of who we really are. We can intellectually understand that we are the consciousness, which is timeless, which is formless, which is infinite, which is not subject to birth and death. But without that, there would be no other experience. That is the real reality. And knowing the real reality is a spiritual awakening that is so desperately needed today for our collective healing. At the level of the body, at the level of the mind, at the level of the emotions, a return to spirit. Be holy and be healed. Until tomorrow, goodbye.